explore the inspiring journey of two lawyers who transitioned their careers from law into a pursuit of icon painting and stone sculpting. Discover how retirement can be a time for creative growth and healing and deepening spiritual connections. Welcome to this episode of The Retirement Spy at the Retirement Spy Studio, where we share experiences in a collaborative platform for those entering phase 2, or we'll find out phase 3 of life today, and ready to embrace these chapters with gusto and an attitude of carpe diem. You'll find out more about us at www.theretirementspy.com, or send us ideas and topics to hello@theretirementspy.com. I'm really excited today. I've got my friends Nancy and Jim Ewing coming to talk to us today about a couple of things. Really, one, life in retirement as an artist and doing their art pursuits, but also as a married couple now having 24 hours a day around each other. And they've had a little bout of weather testing because they've been retired for a while. Let me tell you a little bit about Nancy and Jim and what they're doing, which is really fascinating. And this is a study of left brain and right brain, because both of these are retired attorneys are now in the art world. So there's a mix of the left brain and right brain. Nancy really has spent most of her life trying to move south. She grew up in Massachusetts, did work in New York, and then got a law degree in University of Virginia, and then came down here as a litigator before married Jim, met him in Virginia as well. Came down here, raised a family, and retirement put her into a life of art. And I'll go backwards to say she also had an art degree from University of Virginia. So she wasn't going into retirement with art without any background or without any talent. But what we'll talk about with her uniqueness is she's doing icon painting, which is a prayerful pursuit to art, and she's teaching classes on it. Now, Jim, on the other hand, Jim is the battle-tested man who went to the Naval Academy, which we're so proud of. Thank you for your time and your service, by the way, Jim. And he was really unique in that he was in the fleet as a navigator in anti-submarine aircraft in the Atlantic Fleet. Not to go into too much detail, but his second career really was in the Navy, doing what he was doing, serving our country. He went to University of Virginia Law School, came out and became an intellectual property lawyer. How about that? At Kilpatrick, which is a large law firm here in town. And when he retired, interesting, he decided to pick up art as well, but he picked up sculpting, stone sculpting. We had the benefit of traveling with Jim and Nancy to Jerusalem a few years ago, and I found out a little bit more about them. My wife has had just a wonderful time doing icon painting. I think she's done 2 with you, Nancy. And I was fascinated with Jim because as I was talking to him on our trip, I said, "What hobbies do you have?" He says, "I sculpt rocks." And so I can't wait to get into this with you, Jim. So welcome to both of you to the Retirement Spy. This will be really fun today.
Thanks, Zach. Thanks for having us.
So tell me, what did retirement mean to each of you when you first stepped away from your careers? And I think, Nancy, you went first because it was kind of after the kids, or it was a different time than Jim had.
Yep. I actually kind of retired several times from several different occupations in my time. Practicing law was only about 5.5 years. And then I stepped away and retired when I had with my second child. And then we kind of made the division that Jim was going to kind of do everything outside the house in terms of employment and bringing in income and all that good stuff. And I did almost everything inside the house. So it was but the amount of hours he was working at a big law firm, kind of time pace, like 70 hours a week plus, it just helped me to take the pressure off of that and have my pressure only coming from my whole sphere, the kids in the house and all the other things. Did a lot of volunteer work as the kids started going through school. And so that was kind of a mid vocation, a lot of volunteer work. And then when I was an empty nester, that's when I actually started the art. So it was when my second went to college, and I started taking classes, taking workshops. Sometimes it was only one a year. I was still heavily involved in a lot of volunteer and board work. Then in about 2017, I started teaching. Actually, a little bit before that, but we can talk about that later. But I started teaching as well as painting, and that now it's basically a full-time job in the amount of time.
We talked about this before we got on air, but something I'd love to explore is there's a different time frame for retirement for a lot of married couples. And sometimes it can be as simple as women raising the family and or working and raising families. And when the empty nest hits, the retirement or that phase of going on to something new, it can be a little bit different. Jim, you were working, billing 2,200 hours a year, working 70 hours a week. When you decided it was time to step away from being a high-powered lawyer, what was that transition like?
So I did it sort of gradually. I actually started sculpting in 2006. I retired in 2015. So I had been sculpting for 9 years or so. That started on a family vacation to Germany where we visited a stone yard where Nancy's ancestors had worked. And there was a statue that's about 4 feet tall of a particular mythological person called a green man with ivy coming out of his nose and ears. And I had to have it. So I started going inside and negotiating in German with the guy that ran the shop, and quickly found out that this thing would cost more to ship back to Atlanta than I would have to pay him for it. And this was taking some time. And so the daughters got frustrated and said, Dad, if you want one of those so badly, why don't you just go home and make it? And I said, you know what? I just might do that. So we came back to Atlanta. This was in 2006. Came back to Atlanta, and up in Marietta, a sculptor was teaching, and he had an ad in the paper. And so I showed up the next week, and the rest is history. He handed me a piece of wood, and I started hitting it with a hammer and chisel. Chips went everywhere, and it's like 30 years of frustration from practicing law just flew around the room, and it was like totally liberating.
This
So
is cathartic. This is a cathartic. This was therapy too, wasn't it, Jim?
it really was, and that's what started me off on the track to thinking about needing to spend more time doing that sort of thing. Because as you correctly noted earlier, the right brain, left brain thing is a very big deal. And doing art requires you to sort of stifle your left brain so that you can liberate your right brain and see what you're looking at. And that is hard work for a lawyer to do.
There's a great lesson here that I wish everybody in our audience could embrace. You can't retire one day and then just pick up hobbies. And if there's one lesson from today that I like to tell everybody in our audience is that you want to find out what your hobbies are going to be, even if you don't know, and start doing it long before you're ready to retire. Because I've seen people who decide, they hit the magic age, the magic number, whatever it is, and they're like, oh, I'm going to pick up golf. You can't do that. And so kudos to you, Jim. You had the sensory acuity to say, I'm going to develop a hobby, a habit, something fun so that you can make it a gradual transition to something you really love and enjoy. And I just don't think people think enough about that. What you
Yeah,
think?
it wasn't really intentional though. It's just it just sort of happened that way. And
I'll
But
throw
I
so
you
think
this.
he
I'm
knew
lucky.
you did.
Well, I was throwing you a softball. It's going to give you the intellectual power to say, yes, I thought about this meticulously. My left brain and right brain came together, and this is what I came up with. So, Nancy, yours went a little bit different. Tell me what Nancy does is icon paintings. Tell me a little bit about your art pursuit, but in particular, how you got to the niche you are now, and explain a little bit more about icon painting.
Okay, I could do that. A lot of it comes from my family, and then some of it comes from stuff that I was doing in the middle, in between the law and the art. So my family, my father's father immigrated from Romania, 1906. And his family in Romania, my great grandfather was a Eastern Catholic priest. They can get married in the eastern part of the Catholic Church. Just very similar to Orthodoxy. The churches look identical. The liturgy is pretty much identical. Really, the changes have to do. The theology is very similar. It has to do with is it within the Catholic fold or is it in its own Orthodox sphere? And so that was always a part of our background. When my grandfather hit the U.S., he became Roman Catholic because there was no Eastern Catholic churches where he was. So my father was raised Roman Catholic, as was my mother. My mom was an artist. She was an art major in college, and she was a watercolorist, which she pretty much dove into when she was empty nest. Really got back into it and really was in shows and won some awards and, really a lovely painter. So I have kind of those two streams, right? When I got to Bible study, which is one of the things I took up when my kids went to school, literally the day my the last child started kindergarten, I started the Bible study. I joined the Bible study. I was very, one thing at a time kind of person. And so in the Bible study is really where I started thinking, is what I said to myself, I need to start taking my faith a little bit more seriously. I want to learn a little bit more about the Bible. I need to get a little bit more on track here. And so what my co-leader in a small group and within the bigger Bible study had begun icon painting. And when she heard about my family history with the Romanian and Eastern Catholic, and she knew a little bit about my art kind of interest because I had a little tiny art business, but it was just a little tiny, like a couple $100 a year kind of business. And she said, well, you just have to start icon painting. And it was like a little bell rang. I was like, yes, I do. So I just started going to workshops. And the model really is to go to a 5-day or 6-day workshop. And you go and you're in a retreat center or something and you focus in and you learn one icon at a time. For a while, I just did kind of one of those a year. It was a pretty slow learning curve.
But the icon
But
also
then I ramped up later.
it's a prayer process. It's not just painting. It incorporates prayer, meditation. It is and I haven't witnessed it, but I've just listened to your students who've told me about it. It's not just painting. It's prayerful and it's deep meditative prayer, right?
All right, Duncan, that completely cut out. I did not hear one thing of that of your side.
Well, let's see if we can get
Now
that
you're back.
together. No, I'm back.
Now you're back.
So icon painting is a prayerful process. It's not just painting. It's a meditative, prayerful / painting exercise, correct?
Yes, it really is. And it kind of pulls together, all of you, all of the deep parts. And so it can reflect what you're going through. It can help you to resolve some things you're going through. But it really calls upon that whole spiritual side of yourself and also of the saint or angel or Mother of God or Christ, whoever you're painting. You really are in a relationship as you're painting. And then after you finish, you continue to be in relationship, because that is what the icon is a door. I mean, people say it's a window into heaven, but really, I think it's more a door into which the heaven breaks through into our life. And so you have this icon in front of you, and rather than you worshiping it or praying to it, is a means for you to become kind of draw and ask them to enter into your life. And then you're in relationship. And that is really just almost like a facilitating device for you to be able to honestly be in relationship with the hereafter and with the heavenly vision, beatific vision with Christ and his angels and saints. So,
not having any artistic skills whatsoever, and Kristen would disagree because I took a pencil class years ago at the High Museum and she loved what I did. I just didn't get into it because I wasn't that talented. Art is very therapeutic. Jim, switch gears to you. You didn't have any art background at all, did you? Did you have anything in your family that would have propelled you into sculpting or anything?
I took a mechanical drawing class at the Naval Academy. That's pretty much it. But after I had sculpted a few pieces, starting in 2006, he and I both went to Chicago and took a course called Drawing on the Right Side of the Brain.
I bet that was fun.
Here around here, I have the book. It's Drawing on the Right Side of the Brain, and it's taught by this person who was a drawing teacher out in California, Betty Edwards.
Well, it was devised by her.
Yes.
Yeah.
So anyway, we went to this course, and the main thrust of the course is that anyone can draw, but that we have, from about the age of reason, we have had that sort of talent stack taken away from us because we started trying to reason through everything and analyze everything. And we built up in our minds a set of symbols so that when we see something, we have a symbol for it. Like when you think of a face, you think of the eyes at the top of the face as an example, as your symbol.
Or they're perfectly round.
Yeah.
Because we know an eyeball's round.
And so this class was an exercise actually for a week of keeping your left brain at bay and opening up your right brain so that you can actually see what you're looking at. And when you do that, your hand just goes where your right brain is seeing. One of the best exercises is there's an upside down image in the book that you draw. And so there are no preconceptions about what a face looks like. You're just drawing this shape that's in the book that's actually an upside down face. And it comes out amazingly lifelike when you do that without these symbols that you've always built up. And so that's about liberating your brain to do this seeing that you can do, that everybody can do if they want to. So Nancy and I went through that at the same time. And it was a wonderful experience for a week in Chicago to do that.
Very intense, actually.
Yeah, but it was great.
It's amazing. When I took my pencil class, charcoal and pencil at High Museum, gosh, it's been probably 25 years now, because it was before our son was born. And I remember distinctly this book was referenced. That book is very old, I'm imagining, because I did the upside down drawing as well. And what I found to be true is that when my one brain would shut off and the other would open up, the class was like Tuesdays through Thursdays from 7 to 9 at night. I'd come home and I couldn't go to bed till 1 a.m, whatever it is. And I know both of you have experienced this, but the amazement of how sharp your mind becomes when you go through these exercises to open up the other side of your brain. And then you're giddy because you can't go to sleep. And it's not like a caffeine. It's just like, you're bouncing around and your other side of your brain's open. And it's like, oh, that must be the side that doesn't sleep.
Well, if the side takes in everything, your right brain takes in everything, and your left brain is the filter. And so it's like, we don't want that, we don't want that, we don't want that, we don't want that. This is what's useful for us. So we operate in this very edited sphere most of the time. Whereas the right brain's sitting there going, but I have some ideas and I really see how it is. Because your right brain sees how it is and the left brain sees how it filters it through these symbols. And it's much more schematic. So, and that's not just art, it's kind of a lot of things. So every now and then you'll say, oh, my intuition tells me. That's your right brain speaking, right? And so the more you practice accessing that, I think the better you are able to actually work from the truer perception that your right brain has.
One happy offshoot of that was practicing law, where everything is analytical and everything is logical. But when you're working with your client, particularly if they're an inventor or in patent litigation or copyright litigation, where the people tend to be creative, doing this sort of art and getting used to liberating your right brain and being creative and thinking about things that are outside of your analytical set, that really helps you communicate and see and interact with the creative people that you're dealing with. It was immensely valuable to me practicing law for the last 9 years of my career.
You know, it is a trained exercise, because I remember going through this, and I would encourage everybody to get this book and go through it. I'm not and never have been a drug user, but I just remember the experience of opening up that side of your brain was so stimulating and fascinating at the time. And Kristen's like, how come you haven't picked it up again? I said, well, because I'm logarithmically working through my life, as Jim would say, and everything has become very busy. And so it's hard to pick those things up. And quite frankly, the creative process that both of you go through, I think, is more adept in retirement, because you have the time to go there, to experience it, to get your mind right, to quote Cool Hand Luke, which I love to do all the time.
Yeah, actually, there are studies that show that as people get older, their ability to write, compose, do poetry, do prose goes downhill somewhat, but your ability to draw and to sculpt actually gets wider and broader and deeper. You can actually do things better as an older person when you're doing visual art.
Images rather than words.
Yeah, it's a crazy thing, but it tends to work that way. Maybe it's because your left brain is pretty much done with having to think about life. And you can just rely on your right brain to see what you're looking at.
Jim, tell me about your creative process. I don't know much about sculpting. When you are going through, you've grabbed your piece of stone, kind of walk me through what a creative process is for somebody who sculpts stone.
So I start out with a drawing of what it is I'm going to sculpt. I'll do a front elevation, side elevation, and maybe a top, whether it's a figure of a person or whether it's something abstract. And then I will choose a piece of stone, and it'll be a cubic piece or whatever, and I will lay that drawing out on the stone, and then start carving away. And to do that, I will use either a hand point chisel and a hammer, or I will use a pneumatic chisel, which is kind of like an air hammer, like you see people working on the sidewalk with, except it's miniature. And I'll go at it with a point. And so you go at the stone with your point, and then you have a tooth chisel as the next stage, where the Italians call it a gradina, but it was Michelangelo's favorite tool. You go at the stone with that to sort of rough the shape out a little bit more clearly. And then you start using flat chisels, either pneumatic or with a hammer, and you get a pretty good shape.
Well, you're always checking it from all the different sides.
And you're working round and round.
As you sculpt it off, he redraws it.
Always drawing, always moving around the sculpture, winding around, looking at it, standing back, looking at it. And it never ends up looking like you think it would look at the front end. There's a great quote that a good friend of mine said about how the process liberates you from preconceptions. You basically have to understand that the stone, whether it's limestone or marble, is metamorphic. It was crustaceans that fell to the bottom of the ocean millions of years ago, and they were turned into stone through heat and pressure, and they are entitled to have a say in what happens. And so sometimes you'll be carving along and the stone will just split on you, and you go with that. You go with one piece or the other or both, and you have to be open to that possibility. That's part of sculpting with stone, and that's part of the excitement of it. Then after you're done with the chisels, you use files, you use sandpaper, Sometimes we use an angle grinder with a diamond blade on it to smooth things out. And then ultimately we have a 2000 grade sandpaper that we've worked down to and put wax on it, make it look really shiny if it's a marble. But if it's limestone, we kind of leave it rough, depending on what we think the patina ought to look like. And one of my teachers always said that patina requires great courage, because you have to have the courage to know when to stop. You always want to go further. And sometimes when you do that, you'll wish that you had stayed back where you were. There's no real perfect answer to when you need to stop smoothing the stone out. Just as you'll sort of know it when it happens, but you never will be totally satisfied with it.
And you can't go backwards. I think of what little I know about oil painting. You can always kind of paint, smudge, paint over it, start over again, but you're making a commitment in sculpting stone. How do you pick the right size, Jim? You've got a sketch, you know what you want. Is this something that's on a desktop? Is this something that literally you're having a truck delivered in your backyard tell me about the scale of your art.
Well, the biggest piece I've ever carved, I think, is about 4 feet high. It's pretty small. It weighs several hundred pounds. I have to move it around. I have a little crane in my workshop that's called an engine hoist that people use in a mechanic shop to hoist engines out of cars. I use that to move it around sometimes. But more recently, I carve something that I can pick up. That's one of the things about acceptance of growing older, not as strong as you used to be, don't want to bust a gut. And so I'll choose a piece that's 80 to 100 pounds, and it'll be maybe this big, 8 by 12 by 10, something like that. Although I have a few pieces of stone left that I need to work on that are a lot bigger than that.
Tell me about your favorite injury story. I know you've been injured while you've sculpting. Is it you chipped yourself? You dropped a stone on your foot?
Nope, I've been really lucky about that. I'm really careful, because one of the things that I did when I first started carving was to go to a set of symposia down at Georgia State. And part of it was put on by people who are called riggers. And they are people who work in studios, and they also work on the set shooting motion pictures. And they are really careful about how they apply straps and lifting devices to stone, and put into you the fear of God about the need to keep yourself away from a piece of stone when it's being lifted, because if it comes down, you don't want that on your foot. It will basically cripple you if you're not careful. So I haven't had any big injuries. Mostly a cut or hit my thumb with a hammer or whatever. One time I was carving at the Alabama Marble Festival down in Sylacauga, Alabama, which they do every April, which is a blast. 30 of us or so get together and carve stone down there. And they give us odd-sized pieces of marble. It's the largest marble quarry on the planet in Sylacauga, Alabama. And we do this festival. So a lot of the folks down there use angle grinders, big 5-inch angle grinders and 8-inch angle grinders. And some of those folks don't really know how to handle those tools that well and aren't that versed in the safety. And one guy left an angle grinder on the ground, on the concrete platform that we were carving on, and he left the blade side down, and he plugged the grinder back into the receptacle after lunch, and that angle grinder and that spinning blade took off like a shot, and it missed me by about 2 feet and got lodged into the wooden leg of a carving table 2 feet away from me and stuck there. And I was thinking, man, I'm really lucky to have avoided this bozo that wasn't thinking about safety. You never put an angle grinder, I'm getting too deep into the weeds, but you don't ever put an angle grinder with the blade down on the surface. You leave it with the blade up so that something like that happens, no harm done. So that's the closest I've ever come. There's a lot of kinetic energy. Say what?
Who would ever thought art would have been a hazardous hobby?
Yeah, it's huge. It's with sculpting, it's huge kinetic energy. The air pressures that you're dealing with, the weight of the stone, the spinning angle grinder, there's a lot of energy there, and you really have to be careful with it.
Nancy, yours is a prayerful process. As you're teaching your classes, going through icon painting, tell me about the materials you're using, the process that you go through to create what you're creating, because it's not something you do in an afternoon.
Nope, it actually takes about, for an average complexity, average size icon, it takes about 40 to 60 hours. So It's not super long, it's not super short, but when you take a class and you come once a week and maybe stay 2 to 3 hours, it's a good 20 sessions. So, or more. And that takes us from, we usually start in mid October and we go till the end of May. And it takes about that amount of time for someone to do an icon. Sometimes faster, sometimes slower. We don't put any time limits on it. It's changed a little bit since when Kristen, your wife, took the painting with us, because when COVID came, we had to stop for a little while. Then we started back up, but we started back up out on our porch. Some people could do it, some people couldn't. We did a little bit of Zoom. That didn't work very well. Some people did that, some people couldn't. So everybody's spread out in terms of where their icon. I mean, you already work at your own pace because just naturally. But then at that point, people didn't even come back to their icons for a year or two, and it just got really crazy. So when it all started back up, now what it is, everybody picks what they're doing. They start when they finish the last one, they start another one, and it just rolls along. And everybody in the studio can be doing something completely differently, and I just give them individualized instructions. So it's very much self-paced. It's unlike anything else that most of us face because there's no deadline.
So
There's really, it ends when you end it, right? And you give it what it needs. And so that's very different from the way we mostly have to approach anything we do. It's like, I have this much time, blah, blah, blah. And so it takes some people a little while to switch gears. I remember after the first year I taught, and Kristen was with me 3 years, with 3 icons. A couple people came to me and said, okay, well, next year we really want you to tell us what dates we're going to be at what stages. And I said, are you going to tell me you're going to be here every single week? And and people don't bring their work home. So it's like, if I can set a date and you come in by next week and have it, but that's not how we do it. So we pray 6 studio prayers at the beginning of every session. And believe me, and when we get to the hard parts, we're all praying. We're praying a lot more too. But this is kind of an average size and complexity icon.
So you're starting with a wood plank. I mean,
It's a wooden board. The company I buy from now is in Italy. So I import these boards, and now we're having to pay a little bit of a tariff on them, unfortunately, but not so bad. So we get them, or the back and sides are finished, and the front is, I don't even have an empty one, is white gesso. Very smooth as glass. Had 10 layers of gesso and sanding that goes into it. I could make my own boards, but I'm not ever gonna. I mean, in theory,
I don't know enough about art. Are these acrylic paints, watercolor paints, oil paints? And I know there's gold leaf involved too. Tell me about the materials you're going on this.
23.75 karat gold. I do what's called oil gilding, where we put an oil-based adhesive on the board, and then when it gets a certain level of tack or smoothness is the time to lay the gold. It is shiny, but it's not like mirror finish. There's other kinds of gilding that I know about and I have the tools for, but I've never done, and that's water gilding. Those are the 2 main kinds. There's some subs, but that's a very shiny, much more mirror-like finish. It's beautiful, but it's a whole nother skill set. And I just haven't taken the time to decide if I can learn it or not. So we start with the board, the paint. Okay, so the very first icons in the first couple centuries, up until like the 600s, maybe a little bit later, were wax and caustic. So you use, I think it was hot wax at the time. There's a cold wax and caustic too, but wax is your binder. So you have your pigments, which come from anywhere from rocks to earth to, minerals to some organic material. Some of the blacks are burned organic material. Some of the colors were organic material that we don't use anymore. And some of them are very, very dangerous. Some very toxic things like lead, the lead colors. And so it's mostly reduced to a powder and you mix it with a binder. So the first binders were wax. And if anybody's familiar with the Sinai Christ, which is one of the most famous icons, it's from the 6th century. That was a wax icon. Then there was a kind of paint that was developed by painters, and it's egg tempera. You use egg yolk as your binder, and you mix it with the pigments. And I have done egg tempera myself. I really love it, and I've sort of taught it 1 year to a subgroup on a different day. It's harder. It's just more tricky. And so what I normally do is acrylic, certainly for teaching, because it's a lot more accessible. But it's a big divide in the icon world between purists and purists who do what purists always do, which is to insist on that particular purity. And they would say that egg tempera was pretty much the only way you should paint. However, the argument on the side of the people who paint with acrylic, oil is not suitable to icons because icons are layered. The paint goes on in a layered way. You don't want it infinitely blending. It's not really a blended, you blend the face some, but it's really a layered look, and it's a little bit abstracted in terms of the way you develop. So it's representational, but not realistic, if that makes sense.
Yes.
You have a little bit of an abstraction, a little symbolic depiction going. So you have folds, but they're just a little more geometric maybe. So when oils were invented in, I think it was the 15th century, something like that, I'm sure that they were tried, but they're just not suitable. So they kept on going with egg tempera. Then when acrylics came along, can be suitable. And so the argument that the acrylic people would say is, if all these old icon painters were around, they would adopt it because it is good and maybe better at some things. The egg tempera people say that you're never going to get the luminosity of the whiteboard shining through the paint that you get with egg tempera. There are people who take different mediums and extenders and put it in their acrylic and have spent a lot of time trying to make it so that it handles and will have that luminosity with acrylics similar to egg tempera. So I like them both. I paint with them both. I paint mostly with acrylic because most of my time now is spent teaching, and I'm just going to teach with acrylic.
How does the gold get worked into the icon? I know how, but for the audience that are listening to this and not seeing it, eventually the acrylic's down, it's on the board, and gold is put on there as a part of the enhancement to the project.
Correct. So the gold is symbolic of the uncreated light of God. So it's the spiritual, the divine light, the divine, essence. It reflects through these are holy people or angels, or spiritual beings at God, at God's service. So that the gold kind of is the holiness aspect.
How do you do it?
Right. I just want to tell you what it is. In acrylic, as you said, it comes at the end. In egg tempera, it comes at the beginning. But either way, you lay it on with some kind of a binder. And the way we do it, it's just an oil-based binder that you buy. It says gold sizing. An oil-based gold sizing. With water gilding, you use a clay and you use rabbit's hide glue that does the binder, and then you activate it with water when you go to lay the gold.
So I see them. I walk in the studio sometime when they're doing this, and they are painting the adhesive onto the board around the part of the icon that's been painted already, and then they take this really thin, flimsy gold and put it on top, and then let it dry, and then brush it off with a brush.
We rub it on.
I get so stressed out I have to leave, so I've never seen the whole process because it's totally stressful just watching it.
So with oil gilding, we use what's called transfer gold, and it's those little tiny, finely beaten sheets of gold leaf, like what gold leaf the Georgia, the dome at the Capitol. Very thin, the same stuff. It comes in two ways. One is loose, so that if you were to breathe, the whole thing would fly off, or one is slightly somehow stuck to a piece of paper. That's what we use in oil gilding. And you press the paper, and it presses the gold into your sticky base that's not so sticky anymore because you've let it dry for 2 hours. And then you pull up the paper, and then you brush, and it will brush away any gold that's sitting on any area that doesn't have the adhesive. There's other things if we want to do gold details. So like this icon has a lot of gold details.
Wow, that's beautiful.
And you can do those in a number of ways as well. But we have a water-based sizing that you can paint with a little skinny paintbrush. Let that dry for 20 minutes, and then you put the gold on that way. There's also a paintable gold where you take 24 karat gold dust and mix it with gum arabic binder, and you can paint it like watercolor. So, yeah.
I'm sorry, go ahead, Nancy. You're doing great.
No, that's it. There's a lot of technical things that we do, but the gold it's the most fun and it's the most nerve-wracking, but it makes the most impact.
So Jim brought in a question that I'd like to ask you guys to share. You're in the same residence having two separate types of expression of art. One is very quiet, meditative. One is involving chisels and a lot of noise. Do you guys ever find yourselves that, you're having a class and Jim's coming in with a panic because y'all are playing with gold and you're like, Jim, get out of here. Or better yet, you're trying to be prayerful, meditative, and Jim's over there with a chisel hammer somewhere else in the house. How do you work your art magic together without killing each other?
That's not really a problem for us because my stuff happens downstairs at another level in the house.
Or outside.
I carve outside in the driveway when I can because natural light is wonderful for carving stone. Marble is kind of like the luminosity of egg tempera. When you think about marble, you can think about it like the human skin. You can actually hold up a thin piece of marble to the light and it's translucent, sort of like alabaster is. And so working marble in the daylight is the best way to do it. So I'm always downstairs out of range And Nancy's got her quiet stuff going on up here. But a lot of what Nancy does now, recently for the past week, she's been down in South Florida at the Archdiocesan Seminary teaching a bunch of seminarians icon painting. 15
Wow.
of them, right?
Yeah, 15.
Yeah. So she had a helper with her, but they were able to teach, this is her third year doing it, teach 15 seminarians how to paint icons, and all of them complete the icon by the end of the week.
And these are people who've never chosen art, pathway. It is what you do as a first year seminarian. So it's been really a learning experience for me and for them as well. It just opens up all kinds of interesting things for them. But actually, to your point, during the pandemic, I would be painting our dining room. We no longer have a dining room. We have an art studio at the front of our house. So our dining room, our daughter came home. She was working from home in the dining room. That was her workspace. And on weekends, she would sew. She had a sewing space in the dining room. I had a sewing space and a painting space. Jim had a drawing space in his easel. And so we all did it together. We all did all of our creative activities together. And we do talk about our things over dinner. For the last 20 years. We've been talking about art, and the fact that he's got a 3D, perspective and I have a 2D perspective, it's really informed and enriched each other. Jim has given me wonderful insights in terms of my art and even my pathway. He's what got me jump-started into how I was going to teach. I knew I was supposed to teach. I knew I was being called to teach, but I didn't know where, physically, where would it be? But I figured God will provide it when it's really time. I don't know when that's going to be. And then we had a friend who's got multiple degenerative conditions that they were mystifying medically, and it was really sad. And she had a theology degree and was kind of headed to ministry, and that didn't pan out. And I was just really worried about her. And I said to Jim, I just don't know what to do about that. And he said, you need to teach her to paint icons. She's very and it was like another one of those little bells. And I thought, yes, I absolutely do. So that's how I started. I taught her for one whole icon. It took us 2.5 years. And at the end of that, I was like, okay, I've got some ideas of how I would teach. And then I thought, our dining room works great. She would come over, work in the dining room. We're going to keep going with that space. And we just kind of eased right into that first class, in which Krista was a member. Eight people came.
You've answered the question almost. My next question was, how does creating art together affect your relationship? It sounds like it's transcended the family. It sounds like great meal conversations. Did I hear some family members, daughter or son, that are involved with this? Tell me how it's affected the family.
Well, they were all gone. I mean, really, Jim took it up when at least one of them was still home for a year or so. But I took my art up within a year or two, and it's right after our second one left. I think they're very supportive. They love seeing it. They're artistic in their own ways, each in their own ways. But right now, they're not really devoting very much to their art. A little bit. Jenny does a lot with fiber art. She knits and sews and stuff like that. But they're super supportive, and they can talk a good game too. I mean, everybody loves to intellectualize, so we can chit chat a lot about what we're doing. But it really has been something that we can bring our own perspectives to the table.
Yeah, it brings us closer together to talk about what Nancy's working on, what I'm working on, and always room for new thoughts and improvement.
Oh, absolutely.
Have you tried each other's? Nancy, have you ever tried sculpting, or Jim, have you done an icon painting before, or do you kind of stay in your separate corners with admiration for each other?
That's it.
Yes, the latter is the case. I could not possibly do an icon. After you carve stone for a long time with the pneumatic hammers and the chisels and stuff, your fine motor skills aren't what they used to be. So I couldn't possibly do an icon. I don't think.
Well, you really could. If I could get those seminarians too, but he hasn't done what he needs to do in his art. He hasn't finished it, right? So there's and I've done 3D over the years in various ways, but not seriously since high school. But I don't see myself ever wanting to do stone. I mean, Jim loves stone, period. He loves rocks. He loves mountains. He loves geology. We've got a shelf of geology books. I mean, stone is he's got this inner attraction to stone. And so it really works well that you're able to then help work with the stone to come up with what needs to come out of it.
It sounds like you play off of each other. Jim, I heard Nancy complimenting you, how you would suggest ways to apply her art in what she was doing. Do you find each other being critiquing of each other's works in a helpful way, of course, but both of you had an eye for art? Nancy, will you jump in and say, hey, Jim, you're not quite finished yet? Or Jim, heaven help you if you came into Nancy's studio other than to look at the gold and sneeze and panic.
Yeah, there was one time when I was heading out to California to carve in Sonoma, and I had some drawings that were pretty much slavish copies of the cover of a Pink Floyd album, the Mission Bell album. And Nancy looked at that and looked at the album cover and saw the likeness, and she said, "You can do better than that. You need to be more creative. You can't just copy something somebody else has done." And that was great advice. And I've taken that advice for the rest of time. Basically, you have to go your own direction. You can't take what somebody else has done and really just make that.
It was, I think he didn't want to hear it at the time.
Yeah.
Because he wanted to just be done, and got kind of upset. Next thing you know, he came up with the best thing you've ever sculpted. So, I mean, it really was. It was, and of course, once I said that, I thought, "Ooh, I think I pushed too hard." And he has definitely pushed me. He said, "That's not as good as, you know." There are times when, but in specific ways. And the other thing, like I was doing, I don't do full length as often, and I've also moved into really doing a lot more, paying a lot more attention to designing my own, rather than saying the one that I showed you was a version of the Vladimir Mother of God. It's one of the most famous icons there is, and so it's an adaptation of and icon painting. There's no negative to painting something that's been painted before. If it's one of the holiest icons, miracle working icon or whatever out there, you extend its truth by making a faithful copy. So it's fine, but I've also been working on developing, and so on full length is just you have a whole body to deal with. And Jim was so helpful because he has had to do that in sculpting, really learn the anatomy, and you've spent a lot of time studying anatomy.
Yeah,
and reading about it
and learning gesture and how to show in 2 dimensions in a drawing, so that I can convert it into a 3D sculpture. How to show when somebody's shoulder's up and their right hip is up. How to get that gesture, because gesture is communication, and it's powerful communication, and so you can put that in your icon, although not as radically as you do in sculpture or representational drawing. But I've had a couple of comments about gesture, and we work together on that sometime, and it's really fun to do.
Even something is basic. It was basic to you, but it was like to me as that the foot bearing the weight needs to be centered under your ear. Yeah. Like I didn't know that, and then once I moved that foot over, the whole thing made sense. I mean, it was the slightest little bit.
You had the balance then.
If I had studied, and there are icon teachers who will teach you that, I just sort of didn't go that route yet.
So this brings a good question. There are challenges in growth when you do this. What recommendations would you give to our audience about the challenges you've had in learning these art forms later in life? And how do you keep your skills honed?
Practice.
Yeah, practice is the key. Practice and patience. Being patient with yourself and recognizing that what you start out to do is not going to look like what you end up with, at least in my case. With Nancy, it's different probably. But it's about patience and letting the process drive your preconceptions to something that's even bigger and better. It's like the old metaphor about how somebody can throw a rock through a stained glass window, and a great artist can take the pieces and put them back together again and create something even better. It's kind of like that. At least it is with stone.
I think also just finding good sources, either people to talk to, or if you take courses. I mean, I'm sure you found it when you went to California. You're learning from the teacher, but you're also learning from each other. And so just filing away interesting tips and tidbits and information helps. There's books, of course, there's online, there's courses you can take, but then figuring out how you're going to incorporate that.
And not relying on the wrong teachers. That's critical.
That's true too.
But the question is, who's the right teacher? Who's the wrong teacher? You don't know until you've had the experience and you know what to ask, right?
Yeah, you basically have to go at it with an attitude of inquiry and talk with a lot of people and see who it is whose judgment you trust and get their ideas on who you should learn from and who you should not learn from. So you sort of edge into it. You don't just all of a sudden pull the trigger and say, I'm going to spend $2,000 it's from X. You sort of work your way into that by talking with trusted people, because it's not the money, but it's an incredible waste of time if you start off down a wrong track, and it's hard to break bad habits. So it's critical to.
And there's also teaching styles. So just like in anything, Some people you're going to be on the wavelength and be able to get what they're trying to teach, and some people, and not every great artist is a great teacher. That's huge. I mean, figure Leonardo had a teacher. Leonardo was more talented than his teacher, but he had a teacher. They all do. Everybody does. Picasso did. You have to learn, but then when you become the great, you may or may not be a good teacher. So sometimes I know that one of the teachers I worked with, he had a guy that he studied under. It was a Orthodox priest, and was not a great teacher, but he just had to sit there and watch him and learn because that's who he had. And so, sometimes it's optimal, sometimes it's suboptimal, but
well, sometimes you're learning what not to do, right? As you're going through this, saying, okay, interpretive art is what it is. And you're like, okay, I appreciate what I got out of this. I got one grain of knowledge here, but the rest of this is what I don't want to do.
Exactly.
Question, what kind of, so have you had any unexpected rewards or surprises that came along the way?
Nothing really unexpected for me, except for the joy and pleasure of working a piece and seeing how it progresses over time. And there'll be a moment where I remember one time when I was in Italy, in Pietrasanta near the Carrara Mountains, and it was in the afternoon, and I was working a piece of marble to create a stone helix, and it was probably 3 or 4 in the afternoon in September, and the sun broke through the clouds and shone down on this marble, and all the crystals popped in the marble, and it was an unforgettable experience. Those little things happen one time to the next when I'm carving, and I take those to the bank. But they're little things, and they happen in the course of what I'm doing.
But there's also probably the somewhat unexpected satisfaction that you were able to create these things that you didn't know you would be able to do until you started and put in the time. I mean, you've made some real beauty, and it's kind of cool.
Yeah.
I mean, I think from my perspective, one of the biggest surprises has been when I started teaching, the community that formed.
Yes.
But people show up at your house week after week, and they get to know each other, and so what we share together has been just really, really special.
So this is the piece of stone I was carving in Pietrasanta. You can see how it's a helix of marble. I was told when I started that you'll never be able to get away with this because the marble doesn't have the tensile strength to take to bear the weight that it has to bear in this little helix form.
Point out the face on it too.
And I've got a face on the helix right here. It's kind of subtle. And my granddaughter decided to add some additional visual art by drawing on it with a pencil, which I haven't erased yet. It is just getting away with that, with a piece of stone, getting away with being able to make a helix out of marble. Suspend this with a rope, you can hit it with a spoon and it will ring like a bell. And just being able to do that and get away with it somehow satisfies the aerospace engineer inside of me from way back many years ago. It's like, you can't do that. Oh, yeah, I can too. So that was fun.
My conclusion of listening to both of you as we head into the end of our interview today is both of your artwork are healing processes. Nancy, your prayerful meditation as you're doing an icon is so therapeutic and so relaxing and so looking for the word to get you closer to God. And then Jim, good grief, you probably saved thousands of dollars in therapy as you sat and chiseled pieces of stone with the idea of some clients that you really didn't like a lot, as you're taking out a very cathartic effort in creating the sculptor that you are, but at the same time healing from past wounds.
Yeah. That cathartic experience that's a good point. As I mentioned, the first time I ever hit a piece of stone and the chips started flying, it was like liberating because the kinetic energy from all that practicing law just started moving around the room and freed me up to do something that opened me up to be able to see what I'm looking at. So it was wonderful.
And I can tell you that this past year, like 20 years after my trip to Romania to see my great-grandfather's church, I was able to paint that crucifix on the wall, which is a replica of the crucifix that was in his church. So I finally got to, and it's a neg tempora, so I finally got to where I could faithfully paint something that I wanted to paint from that. I did one for myself and one for my brother who I traveled with. So that was kind of a full circle moment that I really love.
Let me ask you a closing question for each of you, because I think this will be helpful for our audience. What advice would you give to other retirees or people who are approaching that phase in life who are considering a creative pursuit? What advice would you have for them?
I'd say set aside a little bit of a budget, a little bit of time and money to pursue the craft with a teacher. Workshops, you took workshops too. You also did some weekly classes. So whatever the method is, or wherever you are, you might have to travel to do it. To get a jump start on your skills, because people try, when I'm painting, people try to do it on their own, and it's super, super hard. It's best learned next to someone else. The apprenticeship model is a model that existed for centuries, and it's still a good model.
I would say two things. Number one is, if you think there's something that you might be interested in, to go online and see what there is locally. And that bleeds into number two. And number two is, just try it, and you'll figure out pretty quickly if you like it or not. You'll know pretty quickly. Like if it's knitting, or if it's quilting, or if it's painting, or if it's drawing with pencil, you'll figure out pretty quickly whether you like that or not. And if you do, then it's just naturally going to feed you into people online and otherwise that you start talking with, and it'll take you down some trajectory that you had no idea would ever.
Wow, what a wonderful way to spend retirement and plan for retirement. Jim and Nancy Ewing, you've been jewels for us today at the Retirement Spy. Thank you so much for your time. And we look forward to hopefully having you on and seeing some of your artwork at another episode in the future.
That'll be
Thank
great.
you, Duncan.
Thank you.